High FOC versus super tuning a bow. In this video, I'm going to talk about high FOC in your arrows versus super tuning your bow. What's more important? What's the most important things for you to focus on as an archer or bow hunter? I'm also going to give away a compound bow by the end of this video. I'll even include some of my field testing that I've done over the years and what I think about broadheads. So let's get started. So in this video, I'm going to tune this bow I want to get it shooting bullet holes. I'm going to do bare shaft tuning through paper. I just took this bow out of the box. I haven't even shot it yet. Just tied a D-loop on it, put all the accessories on. This is a Dragon X8 compound bow. I still have to finish putting in the peep sight. If you buy one of these are a great bow to use for hunting or even as a backup bow. I'm keeping one as a backup bow just to let you know, or even any bow, if you put the sight light on and you're like, hey, my sight light doesn't work, unscrew the cap, bang it on the table, and there is actually a clear plastic piece in the top. I don't even know if it'll show up on camera. And that prevents the batteries from engaging and wearing out before you get it. So make sure you pop that out of your sight so that it'll work when you're ready to use it. For this video, I'm going to heavily use these gold tip kinetic pierce arrows. So they have the ability of putting weights down in the front to add FOC. I have 100 grain tips in these right now, but I'm going to put 100 extra grains in one of them, which is 6 little pieces. These come in 20 grain increments. I've got 6 and then attached together, and then 3. So I'm going to have a 444 grain arrow, a 504, and then 564 grain. To add the extra grains, simply pop off the nock, take my little grain pieces, slide them down the shaft, and then you also get this little tool, and then you tighten them in. It's pretty sweet. And this is kind of fun because then you can really toy around with different FOC, nice and tight. Okay, there's the 3 extra pieces. That's 50 grains or 60 grains. Yeah, so they're 20 grains a piece. So that's add 60 grains. And take my next one, pop the end off, get my 100 grains. I got to interject as I'm editing this because this is annoying me. So for whatever reason, I was thinking of adding 100 grains. And I added 6 instead of 5, so I added 120 grains. That's where, as throughout the recording of this, I was referring to that as a 544 grain arrow, because in my head I was thinking I added 100 grains, but it turns out I added 120 grains, so it's a 564 grain arrow. I don't have time to re-record everything, so let's just roll with it. Slide that down in. Another thing I'm going to do is I took standard hunting arrows and I have a 75 grain tip, 100 grain, and 125 grain tip. And we'll see if there's any impact on those different grain tips in our tuning process. Another thing I'm going to do is near the end, I'm going to go out to the range and I'm going to put a dot at the top of the target, sight in my 20-yard pin, and then I'm going to walk back to 30 and 40 yards. And I'm going to shoot with my 20-yard pin on that dot. And we'll see the difference in how much the arrows drop for each grain arrow. So how much more will an arrow drop at those longer distances with the added weight to the arrow? Alright, so now I'm going to start the bow tuning process. But what I want to say too before I do that is one of the most important elements for hunting, in my opinion, is a razor blade broadhead to the tip. When I went through hunter's education back in the early 1980s, they did a demonstration. They took a broadhead which was razor blade to the tip, such as this, and they took a deer hide that was tanned, and they held the deer hide over the broadhead and then they took it with 2 fingers and pulled down, and it went right through, right over the broadhead with no trouble at all. Then they took a broadhead that did not have a razor blade to the tip. It was still a fixed blade broadhead because back then they did not have mechanicals, but it had a screw-on tip with a little point on it. And back then it was aluminum arrows, so they took the hide, put it over the arrow, and started to pull down and pull down. Eventually it snapped the arrow in half, didn't get penetration. So that was a very big impression on me on how important a razor blade broadhead to the tip is for maximum penetration. The whole point of high FOC is people think the more weight up front is going to give you better penetration. Actually, more important than high FOC is this type of broadhead razor blade to the tip. That's my field experience and what I've learned through the past. This particular buck right here, I shot intentionally through the shoulder blade with a 350 grain arrow. I was training for IBO shoots that year, so I was shooting everything with 350 grain. 5 grains per pound is typically what you would associate with IBO. Now I was shooting 65 pounds with a 350 grain arrow, so it was a little bit more than 5 grains per pound, but I was shooting that in 3D shoots, and I decided to do it for hunting. I used this broadhead. It went through the shoulder blade and 10 inches into the ground past the deer, complete pass through, with a very light arrow. Now that is field tested experience, went through bone and 10 inches into the ground. I'll put a link to the video. By the way, I will also link some of the other things I'm going to share with you, and I'll also encourage you to pick up one of my new t-shirts. Honey, I'll be late tonight. I'm going to get dinner on the way home. You got your deer in the different meat sections there. So pick one of those up on my website or on my YouTube channel. So the point is, when people are thinking about penetration, that tip really makes a big difference. If your bow is properly tuned, you're going to get good arrow flight with a fixed blade broadhead. Now, the other concern, people think, well, what about the cutting diameter? You know, this is a smaller cutting diameter than some of these big expandables. Well, if your bow's in tune and you can shoot where you're aiming, a vital hit with this broadhead is going to be more effective than a shaky shot, a not so great shot with a longer expandable broadhead. I've been shooting the G5 Montac for many years. I'm not sponsored by them. This is, just my field experience. And you don't have to use this brand, but this style of broadhead, the deer usually drop over in my sight. I usually see them fall over when I shoot them in the vitals with this. Another important thing I want to note here is you don't need a pass-through shot for it to be a vital shot. What you need to do is hit it in the vitals. I've talked to a lot of newbies at hunting and they think, oh, I got to get a pass through. That's not the case. You got to get it in the vitals, either the heart or lungs. Sometimes you could go through the lungs and maybe hit the opposing shoulder blade and it gets stuck. I've had pass through shots with expandables, even raised broadheads, and not had a speck of blood on the blood trail. So a pass-through shot isn't going to guarantee you a blood trail. It's also not going to guarantee you a found animal. The key is having a well-tuned bow and being able to hit the deer in the vitals or the animal that you're hunting in the vitals. That's the key. So although the high FOC has been getting a lot of attention and craze, there are other things that are actually more important than extra weight in the front of your arrow. The first thing we want to do in the tuning process is get our rest and knock point in the right location. I really like to use a caliper for getting my center shot. I bought this one for 20 bucks. It has been worth every single penny of that. What I like to do is set it long, and then I put it against the back of the riser here, and then I slide it in till it makes contact, and then I'll take it off. I'll look at that number, and I'll redo the same for the front, and I'll try to get those numbers to match the best that I can. Once I know that my rest is square, I'll also verify that my knock point is in the right location. You can use the caliper to help you with that too by measuring vertically front and back to see if you're getting the same measurement, because if it's plumb, it will give you the same measurement. But then I like to take it a step farther and just verify by putting these levels on, and I put my bow in a bow vise, and I'll clamp these on, and I'll make sure that my arrow is square. I'll put, again, links for these if you don't have them. These are very inexpensive, like 12 bucks or so. You can get these, and they are great tools. A bow vise, the one I use, you could get for like 40, 50 bucks. Really helpful in the tuning process. Now what I'm going to do is put the bow on the draw board, and I'm going to check the draw stop timing. I'm also going to just take a quick look and double check my cam lean. If I have any, there is a little bit. So to get started in the tuning process, I'm going to remove all cam lean, and I'm going to try to get the draw stop timing right on, and then we'll move over to paper tuning. So our first step, put it on the draw board and see where the draw stops are hitting, and then when I put it in the bow press to adjust for the draw stops, I'll also work on the cam lean. I also want to just mention this. These bows are only 200 bucks. It's a pretty nice deal, and it's a nice bow for what you're getting for $200. If you need a backup bow, or like if you're someone who's shooting a flagship bow, or you're just looking to get into archery, this is a really good option. Also, if you're someone who's hunting out of a saddle, having a short axle to axle bow is becoming more popular. If you want to try it out, this is a fairly economical way of testing it out to see if it's for you. And because of its long draw length and draw weight adjustability, you could pass this bow on to someone else if you decided you wanted to get something like a flagship bow with a shorter axle to axle. And lastly, even if you don't have a bow press, you can actually loosen the limb bolt so far on this that you can take the strings and cables right off. So you don't even need a bow press to work on this bow. It also comes with all the Allen wrenches you need to work on it, so you don't even have to go out and get extra tools. So let me put it on the draw board here and see what we got. I'm going to set this bow up at a 29-inch draw length because that's one of the most common draw lengths out there, and I want to make this as relatable for as many of you as possible. So I'm going to do speed testing near the end, shoot through the chronograph, and it'll be in a draw length that people can associate with. So 29-inch, it'll be a little awkward for me to draw and not torque the bow because I'm going to have to bend my arm to anchor, but let's give it a try. Alright, so my top draw stop is about 1/4 inch shy. So I'm going to add twist to the cable on the other end to compensate for that. Alright, after putting a half twist in the cable that goes to that cam, I ended up having a little bit of extra rotation in the other direction so that the top cam was hitting first. What I did to compensate for that was I took a half twist out of one side of the yoke of the top cam to help the rotation. So now they're hitting at the same time. What you want to do when you're timing a cam system like this is the cam that is coming in contact with the cable first, you either want to shorten the cable that's attached to that cam, or you want to lengthen the cable that's attached to the other cam. In this instance, since it was a very small amount, I took a half twist out of one side of the yoke to lengthen the cable that goes to the other cam in order to get it on. So what you'll find out when tuning this type of bow sometimes is putting a half twist in the cable alone is sometimes too much. So to review, when we started off, my bottom cam was hitting first, which means I need to shorten the length of the cable that goes to this cam. So it's this cable here is attached to the cam here, and then it's attached to the limbs on the other side. So I did 1/2 turn to that cable, and then the top cam was hitting a little bit before the bottom cam, but not as much of a distance before. So you could either shorten the length of the cable that goes from the cam to the limb, or you can lengthen the cable that goes from the bottom cam to the top limb. Since I just shortened this cable and it was a little too much, I decided to take a half of a twist out of one side of one yoke to see what that would do, and it got me perfect. The diameter of the yokes is smaller than the diameter of the cable down here. So even if I needed to add a half a twist to both cables or in the yoke system up here, it's going to have less of an overall impact than if I did a half of a twist down here. In situations where a half of a twist to both sides of the yoke is even too much, then you choose one side. In this situation, since I haven't done anything adjusting any yoke tuning yet for cam lean, I just looked at the cam, and in order to keep it centered, I looked at it and I saw that if I took a half a twist out of one side, it would actually help it be centered in its alignment in the leaning process. So right now there's virtually no lean in either cam. My cam timing is on. Now it's time to shoot through paper and see what kind of tears we get. Okay, so I've got the 444 grain arrow. These are all 300 spine, by the way. So it's 444, 504, and then 544. So let's see what kind of paper tears we get with each. Okay, so in all of these, I'm getting a knock high tear. The 444 grain, so not as much weight up front, is giving me not as much of a tear as the other two. With a knock high tear, you either move the arrow rest up a little bit or move the knock point down a little bit first. And when I say a little bit, I'm talking about a 32nd or 16th of an inch, just a tiny, tiny bit, to see if that has any impact on the tears you're getting. If it doesn't, then we'll start yoke tuning. Okay, after a slight adjustment to the rest, I'm going to shoot them again and see what happens. Okay, my tears are pretty equal, which tells me that really, since that little movement, I only moved it about a 32nd to a 16th of an inch, somewhere right in there. With that little bit of movement, it didn't do anything. So I'm going to adjust the cam timing a little bit. So what I'll do in this situation with a high knock tear is I'll add a half a twist to both of the top yokes. That's going to change the timing of the cams. Even if the cams don't hit at the exact same time on the back, let's say one hits a 16th of an inch before the other, for this draw length, that might actually give the bow the best arrow flight with the knock point square. So let's see what happens with a half twist added to both top yokes. Okay, now with the half twist added to both top yokes, let's see what happens. Alright, in doing that, my vertical tear decreased, but I started to show a little bit of a side tear. So with the amount of difference that it made, adding a little twist to each yoke, I could see that the one yoke is twisted a lot more than the other. So that half a twist had more of an effect on the one than the other. So I'm going to add a half twist to only the top right yoke now and shoot again. Because my vertical tear is decreased, but my left to right, I've gotten a little tiny bit of a right tear showing up. Alright, let's try it again. Didn't quite aim low enough on that one. So this one, my vertical is good. The amount of flex in the arrow is causing a difference between these. This has 50 grains more than that. It's causing the arrow to bend more. This is a very stiff spine. I'm only shooting 60 pounds. So in order to get the right amount of flex to come off the bow, looks like this amount of weight up front is helping the arrow achieve good flight. And this one here got a little messed up. I'll shoot that one again. Okay, so my vertical is good on both of these. It's just I'm getting a right tear. So what I'll do for this is I'll add a half a twist to both the top and the bottom yoke to compensate for a horizontal tear. I mean, you could also move the arrow rest, but I know that my arrow rest is on square using the caliper. So being that my rest is square, I'm just going to yoke tune at this point. So I'll add a half twist to both the top and bottom yoke and see if that gives me more of like a bullet hole type of a tear. Okay, so in that adjustment, I'm actually getting good left to right tear here and about equal left to right tear on those. This first one's a pretty good tear. These didn't necessarily, that one didn't improve at all. This one didn't really improve at all either. Alright, so I want to interject here. I did several more rounds of shooting, and I found that the arrow that had no extra weight in the front, the 444 grain arrow, so it's just the raw shaft with a 100 grain tip, it tuned perfectly. And the other two, I couldn't get a perfect tear. And the reason for that is when you add weight up front, you're going to effectively decrease the spine of the arrow. What that means is more weight up here is going to cause that arrow to flex more when it's coming off the bow. When there's too much flex, it's possible that you just can't get a good tune with that arrow. The reason why I'm pointing this out is you may have arrows and you might say, I'm going to add a bunch of weight in the front of mine and have a lot more FOC, but what you might end up doing is effectively decreasing the spine of the arrow, making it weaker, making it bend more when it's shot. With that extra weight, it's going to cause the arrow to bend more. When the arrow bends more, it impacts the tuning of the arrow. Imagine if we had a broadhead on here and you had fletching on the back. When it's bent more, you have the things that could cause steering to the arrow pointed in different directions. And that's going to cause an impact on the tuning of the bow. My point is, you might not be able to get your bow to tune and shoot well just by adding a bunch of weight in the front of your arrow. So with a high FOC, that you hear a lot about that. It's not necessarily just about having more weight in the front. You need to have a balanced system, a tuned bow. Everything has to work well. Now, in this scenario, the straight shaft with just a 100 grain tip tuned really nicely. I'll get very good arrow flight. All right, now to do some testing with spine. So I got a 400 and a 500 spine arrow with a 100 grain tip. I've also got a 300 spine with a 75, 100, and 125 grain tip. We'll just see what kind of paper tears we get with these. All right, so the 500 spine arrow, I got a low knock tear. The 400 spine arrow was good knock tear vertically and just a hair to the left on the horizontal. And then the 300 spine had a good vertical but more to the right of a tear. So this helps you see how the arrows act differently based on their spine. This is all with a 100 grain tip for each. So for this, I would, depending on which arrow I would want to be using, I would need to tune for that. Now, I would most likely say this bow's at 60 pounds. The 400 spine arrow is really going to be the best, and it's almost already on. There's just a slight hair. I'd do a half of a twist to the yoke on the left side to get a perfect hole. This one would probably need a full twist, so for the adjusting the cam lean. This one you're going to have to, because of the way that arrow is flexing coming off the bow, you're going to have to change your knock point, either the arrow rest or the knock point itself. Okay, for this test here, I shot the same 300 spine arrow. This is with 75 grain, this is with 100, and this is with 125 grain. So this particular arrow, with the way the bow is currently set, the 300 spine arrow with the 125 grain tip gave a really a good bullet hole tear. The 100 grain tip, I had a very slight left tear, And then with the 75 grain tip, I had a low knock tear. Again, so this shows you how the different amount of weight you're putting in front of your arrow can impact the way the arrow is coming off the bow. And so it's really important to make sure the bow is tuned for that weight, that spine of arrow and that weight of tip. You want to make sure you're shooting the same weight with all your arrows, including your practice and hunting arrows. Well, let me talk about some other things too that impact the spine, which would be the length of the arrow. So as you probably noticed when I was doing the shooting, these arrows stick way past the end of the bow. Again, because I've got this bow set up at a 29-inch draw. I'm a 31.5, 32-inch draw, depending on which bow I'm using. So let me just throw this arrow on here. I've got a target right there. You never want to draw a bow or put an arrow on and draw a bow back unless it's pointed at a target. So this bow here is set up a little bit longer, but even still, this arrow is very long for this bow. Now, what that means is this arrow can flex more because that weight is farther away from the nock. I could certainly shorten this arrow and that'll help stiffen the spine. That's another thing you can do for tuning. Some people will actually cut their arrows back close to the arrow rest. I personally will cut mine, even though I could technically cut it back here, I will cut my arrows out here past the end of the riser. And the reason for that is safety. I like to have the broadhead past where my hand is. I have a friend, Andrew Penzi. His YouTube channel is called Vital Point, if you want to check it out. A couple years ago, he shot a buck. I believe it was a buck. Either way, he shot a deer, but he had his hand open during the shot, and the broadhead gashed his finger wide open, and he didn't have really anything to deal with it, so he had to wrap it in a rubber glove. He's tracking his deer through the woods, bleeding everywhere with his hand. A great learning lesson, and something that we all can learn from. One is keep your hand relaxed. Train yourself to keep your hand relaxed. But even still, the heat of the moment of the shot, you never know. You could just be so focused on the shot, you do that with your hand, and you could gash your finger with the broadhead very easily. And so having the arrow and the broadhead out farther gives you a chance of hopefully not doing that. Again, if I was to put this arrow on the bow and draw it back, again, I got my target right there. Even here, if I was like that, my broadhead is still going to be pretty much out past where my fingers are, and it's a safety thing. So that is going to impact, though, the spine of the arrow is the length. How far out there is your weight? Because I have such long arrows, because of my long draw length, my overall arrow weight is heavier, and it's harder to get a lot of FOC. But as I'll talk about in a little bit some more, it really hasn't impacted me at all. And I mentioned this already, I shot this buck at 25 yards with a G5 Montec, and I shot it intentionally through the shoulder blade because of the angle that he was on, and the arrow went through the bone, the shoulder blade, through the deer and 10 inches into the ground with an arrow that was a total weight of 350 grains. So the overall arrow weight, I know there's people shooting like 650 grain arrows. I even talked to a guy once, about that. I was like, how heavy are your arrows? He's like, 650 grains. He's talking all about FOC. I'm like, well, what does it do when you hit a deer with it? He's like, well, I've never shot a deer yet. I was like, well, you're so focused on these arrow builds and having a heavy, high FOC that there's other factors here you're overlooking. Let's look at the speed of each of these arrows, these three arrows, and what kind of kinetic energy and momentum it's providing. And then we'll talk about what's really important here as far as getting penetration in a deer, and we'll do that in the context of kinetic energy and momentum. Then the last thing I want to do is get out on the archery range, shoot at different distances so you can see how much more drop you have in the arrow when you increase the weight of the arrow. But before I do that, I actually want to give away one of these compound bows, a Dragon X8. I'll let the winner pick if he or she wants black or camo. Alright, I've just had a random selection here of one of the entries for this bow giveaway. To get in this giveaway, people just had to share a YouTube video that I made. and then they sent me the link to the share on Facebook and registered on my website. I'm going to call this individual, see if he answers. Just I'm getting a voicemail.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system.
You know what to do.
Is not available. At the tone, please record your message. When you've finished recording, you may hang up or press 1 for more options. To leave a callback number, press 5.
Hey Charles, this is Sean McVeigh with Sean's Outdoor Adventures. Hoping to talk to you. I'll try calling you back in a few minutes. If you get this voicemail and the phone rings again in a couple minutes, please answer. God bless. One other thing I want to mention before doing that, though, is this particular arrow, the Kinetic Pierce, it's a very thin diameter arrow, so the tip is a larger diameter than the shaft of the arrow. So what that does is it actually increases the penetration because it reduces the amount of friction on the arrow shaft. So if you picture an arrow going through, let's say, a target or the animal, it creates a hole. And if the hole that is created on entry is the same diameter as the arrow shaft, you're going to have drag on the shaft the whole way. However, if that hole is larger than the diameter of the shaft of the arrow, you don't have all that drag as it goes through, so it increases penetration. If you're someone who's looking to increase the amount of penetration you get, that would also be a significant consideration for you. If you want to do that, but you want to have a well-tuned bow and good arrow flight that's going to give you the most accuracy. So this particular arrow at 444 grains with the 100 grain tip is giving me the best tears through paper, and really that would be the best arrow to hunt with out of the 3 with the heavier weights in the front for this spine and my whole setup. Let's see if he answers this time.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice.
One other thing I'll interject here is that I tell everybody to subscribe to my newsletter on my website as well as my YouTube channel for these giveaways. The day before I made this phone call, I sent out a newsletter saying, hey everybody, get ready because tomorrow I'm calling somebody to give away this bow. So if your phone rings, answer. I usually give people 3 tries, and if not, I move on to the next person. All right, while I'm waiting to give Charles some time here, I'm going to shoot both of these bows through the chronograph. So I've swapped out the paper tuner for the chronograph here. And let's just see the impact on the speed of the bow from the weight of the arrow. All right, for this example, I've got the 3 arrows I've been working with, which is 444 grains, 504, and 544. I'm going to incorporate a 350 grain arrow as well. So we'll get 350, 444, 500 basically, and close to 550. Start with the 60-pound bow. 29-inch draw, 350 grain arrow, 274 feet per second, 444 grain arrow, basically 100 grains heavier. 249, here's the 504 grain arrow. 236, last but not least, 225. So 225, that's for the 550 grain arrow more or less. Now let's shoot all 4 with the 65-pound bow, 2-inch longer draw length, so a 31-inch draw. Okay, I'm going to start with the 350 grain arrow. 314 feet per second, 444 grain arrow. 283 feet per second, 504 grain. 269 feet per second, and 256 feet per second. Alright, I just calculated the kinetic energy and the momentum for all the arrows that I just shot through the chronograph. Let me try Charles one more time and then I'll give you the results of those numbers as we look at arrow weight.
Your call has been forwarded to an automated voice messaging system.
Hey Charles, Sean McVeigh from Sean's Outdoor Adventures. Trying you one last time. Been trying to reach you to potentially give away a bow to you. I'm going to move on to the next guy though and see if I can get somebody to answer for the video. Talk to you later. God bless. Alright, I tried calling this guy a couple minutes ago, and I forgot to hit record. Let's see if he answers.
Hello?
Hello, is this Dylan?
Yes, sir.
Dylan, this is Sean McVeigh with Sean's Outdoor Adventures. How are you today?
I'm good. Just got home from work. How you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Hey, I'm calling to see if you want a free compound bow.
Absolutely.
Cool. Well, you are the official winner of the Dragon X8 compound bow from the Facebook share giveaway. So you shared the one thing I asked people to share, and then you submitted your name, and that's it, man. You win. You are the winner of this bow. Let me ask you, would you prefer all black or all camo for your bow?
All black.
Okay, you got it, mister. So I'm going to give your shipping address to the good folks over at San Lita who make the Dragon X8 compound bow, and I'm going to have them ship it directly to you. Brand new, never used. Out of the box, baby.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Yeah, man. So do you do any hunting, or are you just into archery, or what?
I actually do. I just got into it last year with a buddy of mine.
Nice.
And so this year's going to be my first, full season of getting into bow hunting and everything. We've been scouting all summer long and finding some places to go.
Nice.
Up on public land around here.
Cool. And you're in Alabama, right?
Yes, sir. Down here in good old Alabama.
Good old Alabama. So do you currently have a bow that you're using?
Yeah, I have one that I got at a pawn shop last year.
Okay.
Picked up there, used bow for me just to get into archery to see if I liked it.
Yeah.
Turns out I really did. So I
cool.
was like, can't hurt to enter your giveaway. I watch your videos anyhow.
Yeah.
I like the content, so I might as well share it all.
There you go. Well, hey man, congratulations! You are the winner. I'll let San Lita know to send you a brand new black Dragon X8 compound. And hey, now you got two bows. So if one breaks, you got a backup.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
All right, man. Congratulations. Thanks for being a part of it.
Absolutely. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.
Bye.
There you have it, folks. It's that easy. I did a contest or a little giveaway. All they had to do was share the one video or a Facebook thing on their Facebook and then enter on my website. He just won one of these. This one's mine, but I'll have a brand new one of these sent to him. All right, now what I want to do is talk about the momentum and the kinetic energy. So kinetic energy is the amount of energy delivered by the arrow to the target. And kinetic energy is more significant when you're dealing with guns because of a shock value, but you don't really have the shock value with archery. So although kinetic energy does give us a value of something, like how much energy is being delivered, it's really momentum, which is the hitting power and the penetration power that we're interested in. So I'm going to go over the numbers here and we'll just take a look at it. So first, shooting the 60-pound setup at 29-inch draw length, shooting the 350 grain arrow, it shot 274 feet per second. Now our formula for kinetic energy is mass times speed squared divided by 450,800. So our foot-pounds of kinetic energy is 58.3 foot-pounds of kinetic energy. The momentum is calculated by the weight times the speed divided by 225,400. So our momentum value is 0.43. Now when we go to the next arrow, the 444 grain arrow, it shot 249 feet per second. That delivered foot-pounds of kinetic energy of 61.1, and our momentum value is 0.49. So the 504 grain arrow shot 236 feet per second, delivering a kinetic energy of 62.3 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, and a momentum value of 0.53. For the 564 grain arrow, it shot 225 feet per second. It delivered 63.3 foot-pounds of kinetic energy and a 0.56 momentum value. Now, there's something very significant I want to point out with the 65-pound bow at a 31-inch draw length. So the very first arrow that I shot was 350 grains. It gave me a 314 foot per second speed. So the kinetic energy value is 76.5 and the momentum value was 0.49. Now this is basically the setup that I used to harvest this deer here, and as I said, the arrow went through this shoulder blade, through the deer, and into the ground about 6 to 10 inches. Again, I'll provide a link to that video if you want to check that out. But the 0.49 momentum value gave you that kind of a result. So how much momentum do you need to hunt and harvest a white-tailed deer? Well, for me, with a 350 grain arrow with a 100 grain tip, razor blade to the tip, it provided plenty. So let's just carry on, but I want to point this out. I think what's very important, especially if you're primarily a deer hunter, is you want to have a well-tuned bow. You want to be a well-practiced archer so that you know your arrow is going to go where you're aiming, and you want to aim for those vitals. If you get your arrow in the vitals, you're going to harvest that animal. As far as getting enough penetration, 0.49 momentum, a value of 0.49, I blew through the deer and about 6 to 10 inches into the ground. So just keep that in mind as far as when you get into all these high FOC arrow builds. You know, if you're just primarily a deer hunter like I am, you don't need to go crazy. So the 444 grain arrow shot 283 feet per second, gave a kinetic energy value of 78.9 and a momentum of 0.56. The 504 grain arrow shot 269 feet per second, gave kinetic energy of 80.9 and a momentum value of 0.6. So the 564 grain arrow shot 256 feet per second, and that gave a kinetic energy of 82 foot-pounds of kinetic energy, and for the momentum value it was 0.64. Now here's one last consideration in this whole topic, and that is how far do your arrows drop the farther back you go. Now if you're only going to shoot 20 yards or less, then having a very heavy arrow, is going to be okay. Keep in mind that in order to put more weight up front, you need a stiffer spine, which means you're going to most likely be adding weight back here, and that's going to be harder to achieve. A high FOC here, you're going to have to keep adding weight, and it's going to be difficult to get an arrow to tune with a lot of weight up front and to get all the spine you need. You're just basically going to end up with a very heavy arrow in order to have a very high number up here for your weight. If you're shooting 20 yards or less, you can get away with that. If you're planning to shoot more than 20 yards, it's going to have a dramatic impact on how much your arrow will drop. Here's an example. I took this bow, the Dragon X8 compound. It's shooting 314 feet per second with a 350 grain arrow. With the 564 grain arrow, it shot 256 feet per second. So I took my first round of shots at 20 yards. I just simply put my 20-yard pin on the top left circle of this target, and I shot each of these bare shafts. Now I did torque the bow a hair on the bottom shot here. That was my shooting error, but it still gave us a representation of how much the arrow is going to drop. So our 444 grain arrow hit the black dot. The 504 grain arrow hits quite a bit low. This is at 20 yards. And the 564 grain arrow hit even lower. Now then I stepped back to 30 yards. I put my 20-yard pin on the black dot. So let's say you're guessing your yardage and you're off by 10 yards. What does that mean for your arrows? Where are they going to hit? So the top arrow here, the 444 grain arrow, at 30 yards, hit right in the middle of my target overall. So if I was aiming with my 30-yard pin, I would have been, that arrow would have hit up by the dot. Now look at the 504 grain arrow. It hit even lower on the target. And my 564 grain arrow, aiming with my 20-yard pin on that top left circle, it didn't even hit the target. It was in the dirt. That shows you at 30 yards, I'm having a drop with the heaviest arrow. So again, what you need to do is balance this whole thing out. If you want to be able to shoot at more than 20 yards, let's say you want to be able to shoot out to 35 yards, the amount of drop your arrows are going to have is going to dramatically increase the difficulty of having a very accurate shot. It's going to be hard to guess how far the animal is going to drop, where's it going to be by the time your arrow finally gets there because it's traveling slower. You're going to have a lot more drop, things like that. So you need to find a balance. So just when you're thinking about this whole topic of high FOC, I've been very successful, not even worrying too much about it, but I have a very long draw length. I have a 31.5-inch draw length. Sometimes I'm shooting a 32-inch draw length. I have very long arrows. I have that razor blade tip, and that gives me great penetration. Another thing that will help penetration is an arrow like this, where you have a very thin diameter shaft with a larger diameter point out here. But to conclude, I will say, especially if you're hunting deer, all you really need to do is get the arrow into the vitals. You don't need to have a pass-through shot into the ground. I've said this before. I've had pass-through shots that have been perfect double long hits and not a speck of blood on the blood trail. But fortunately, because it was a vital hit, the deer didn't go more than 100 yards. I could hear where it went. I walked in that direction. I found the animal. Or I just watched it fall over. So a pass-through shot does not guarantee a great blood trail, nor does one particular type of broadhead over another. My personal preference would be any kind of a razor blade broadhead to the tip. I like these 3 blades. They've been working well for me for many years, so I'm going to keep using them for now. But razor blade to the tip to me is key, and that's a well-tuned bow and a well-practiced archer are the most important things to be an effective hunter, especially if you're hunting deer. I just want to encourage some of you who are getting really wrapped up in the high FOC. You could get so caught up in that you're not getting a well-tuned bow. You're not spending the time on your form and practicing and being an effective archer. And those details are going to make you a worse hunter or less effective, even if you can have an arrow that might give you better penetration. Again, if you're hunting deer like I am, you don't need to go crazy. A 350 grain arrow with one of these on the tip got me this and many other deer. I'm now hunting with a 450 grain setup, and it's really giving me no better penetration at all. It still goes through the deer into the ground about 10 inches, just like the 350 grain did. So I want to thank you for tuning into this video. I hope it's helped. The most important thing is get out there, practice, and get your bow tuned. I have lots of tuning videos if you need help with that. Until next time, take care. God bless. Oh, wait, stop. If you're still here, get in on some of these giveaways. I'm giving out another one of these every month from now till the end of the year, a Dragon X8 compound bow. So go to the giveaways page of my website, get in on that. It's really not difficult. Win yourself a bow. This bow you could set up for basically anybody. Goes from all the way out to a 31-inch draw down to like something like an 18-inch draw, from as low as a poundage as you want to go, like 10, 20 pounds, all the way out to 70. So there you go. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, take care and God bless.